Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Looking at the great suite of notes that Gail has for us this morning, I think we better get straight into that. We're talking about something that, in fact, I'll mention it to the listeners, because Gail mentioned that she speaks into a telephone after she goes to the movies.
Yes, I do.
And I said, did you realise there's an app that can turn what you say into notes? And I just thought it would help you.
It will, John.
So we've been having a look at that. It's called Speech Notes, by the way, people, and it works very well indeed. And so you just speak into your phone with this thing open, and it's got a number of little symbols down the bottom that you can put in the punctuation if you like. You can also speak the punctuation, say...
Absolutely amazing.
So that could be something for you. All right.
Well, it could be a time factor, John. You know, saves a lot of time.
Well, that's dead right. And, of course, we've got to use the technology as best we can. And certainly, that kind of technology may have been quite useful in the times we're going to be talking about.
That's
a movie
right.
which I think is, well, to me anyway, absolutely fascinating, The Professor and The Madman. And to review it, courtesy of that fabulous cinema, that comfortable cinema, to say the very least, that is underselling it. The Shoreline Cinema of wonderful Waikanae. Gail Hall, good morning and welcome. We got there eventually.
Good morning, John.
Right.
Yes, well, John, I did go to the movies and was totally impressed with what I saw. It's the beginning season at Shoreline Cinema for The Professor and The Madman. Not a big audience, but from my point of view, this movie is worth a look. Now, it's directed by Farhad Safinia under the pseudonym of P.B. Sharon. Now, I'm not sure why this guy used a pseudonym. I didn't sort of get round to looking at it, but I'm sure I have seen this guy before under the same pseudonym with other movies.
Okay.
I'm not sure why, but anyway, it was directed by him. Now, the strong performance of Mel Gibson as Professor James Murray, and now he's a professor at Oxford University, deserves some sort of individual award, as does Sean Penn for his portrayal as Dr. William Minor. These two eventually collaborate to create what we know today as the Oxford English Dictionary, which we've all used, John, in our lives at one time or another, for sure. I do worry, though, and us just previously talking, that technology is keeping something like the Oxford English Dictionary on the bookshelf when you can just ask Google the meaning of a word. So, you know, that's a little thing to take note of, John, you know, this lovely Oxford English Dictionary. Now, the surrounding cast of Steve Coogan as Frederick James, and I've seen Steve Coogan in other movies, and I really like his acting. And Natalie Dormer, known throughout the movie as Mrs. Merritt. Now, I've seen her in previous movies too, and I really like her performances as well. Uh-huh. And Eddie Marsan for his role as Mr. Munsey as an asylum guard. There was something about Mr. Munsey that I really took to. I think it was his empathy. I really liked his part, so I have to mention that. And, of course, numerous other talents that gel this movie together. There's a real gel there. Now, right, John, the story. We are in the mid-18th century. Dr. William Minor is a veteran from the American Civil War, which in his mind was pretty horrific, as you can imagine. He is actually a surgeon. A flashback to the war, we see him under order deal with a deserter by having to have him branded like a horse or a cow with the letter D on the side of his face. Well, you can imagine what that felt like. He was ordered to do it. He didn't want to do it. Then we flash back now to set the scene as to how he ended up in Broadmoor Asylum. After some episodes of delusion after the war, and probably caused by the war, I'm not sure, he was sent to London to recuperate. He always imagined being followed. He always had this imagination looking behind him all the time. On a dark night in a London street, he chases a man who he thinks is following him. He pulls his pistol out and shoots him right outside his home. Dead, of course. Mrs. Merrick now comes into the scene. He has just killed her husband. Next scene, we see the crowded courtroom, of course, and with his background of instability, the jury finds him guilty on the grounds of insanity. Okay, so in the meantime, Professor James Murray, and this is Mel Gibson's part, superbly acted, is invited to meet with the delegates of the Oxford University Press. He is a very learned man, speaks many languages, dialects, all self-taught. He is given a proposal to create the Oxford Dictionary, to compile all known words and their definitions. He accepts the challenge. However, it's not a job, obviously, for one man.
Oh, no.
Okay, so he enlists the help from all over the world by a written note. Now, one of these notes, John, end up in a book that has been given to the doctor as a gift from Mr. Munsey, the prison guard. And in it is this note to, looking for people to help with this dictionary. He is also, the doctor, is an educated man as well. So by 1880, he sends at least 10,000 words to the professor, and in the end, he becomes the professor's volunteer helper, approved by the prison to do this. Okay, so he's a very learned man. His cell is just,
Yes.
covered in bits of paper and everything. Well, Mrs. Merrick, wanting to face the doctor after he killed her husband, is a regular visitor to the prison. They form quite a friendship, and when I was watching this, I thought these two are sort of falling in love. I just thought this is what's happening. That was my opinion anyway. And he teaches her to read and write, because he asks her to read something, and she sort of just turned away from him and ran away because she couldn't. So he taught her. So I think this is how the friendship sort of starts to gel together. The committee, as I talked previously, the committee from the Oxford, University, finding Dr. Minor's previous history will not give him any honour for his part in collaborating the words with the professor.
Goodness.
No, because of his background, because he's a murderer and because he's in prison. So he's taken off the project, as you can imagine. The movie gets a bit dark in places, John. The way he's treated at the asylum, it does get a bit dark. But in the meantime, the professor and his colleague, and that's Frederick James, who was played by Steve Coogan, approached the Prime Minister of the time for a reprieve, or at least a release, for appreciation of what he has done to contribute towards this amazing book. But of course he's denied that. But the PM signals a deportation notice to send him back to where he came from, and that's America. So they do this. Now, this, John, is actually a true story,
yes,
as you know.
Yes,
and with a few sort of, artistic highlights, as they do, because, they've got to make it stretch out. But to me, this is a story of two men and their relationship and the legacy they gave the world. And it's true that they did do that through the Oxford English Dictionary. Now, watching the credits go at the back, because I always like to sit there and wait, I wish they'd just slow them down where there's some useful information, because I caught that the professor was actually knighted in 1908, and Dr. Minor died in 1920 and did suffer from catalepsy, which in other words, is schizophrenia. So that sort of was all about his delusionary and people following him and stuff like that. There's a lot more depth in this movie that I can actually have time for today. And it's, to me, it's sort of like a real educational movie in a sense, but I really enjoyed this movie. Now, it is 2 hours, 10 minutes long, quite long movie, but honestly, I just loved it. The acting was so good.
Right. It sounds as if I would love it as well.
I think you would, John. I think it's your movie.
Enormously tempted. Yes, indeed. And now the Oxford was not the first dictionary, I believe, but by far the most comprehensive.
Well, yes, I was thinking that. I thought, well, hey, this is the mid-18th century.
Yes.
There must have been other dictionaries before that.
But it just set the standard.
Yeah, it set the standard.
And certainly that is, it's a remarkable achievement. And so that is The Professor and The Madman. Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson,
well.
yeah. Well, actually, John, I've never been a great fan of Mel Gibson. I mean, okay. But this movie, I just loved him.
Yeah,
I thought it was just so good.
Okay. Sean Penn, up to his usual standard as well. The film is The Professor and The Madman. It's on at the Shoreline Cinema, and Gail liked it. And that's enough for me. Gail Hall, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, John.
Here
nice
on
to be
Beacon.
here.
Indeed. Lovely to see you.
106.3 Beach FM.